And we are off. The 2024 regular season is upon us, and we are starting the week with our final predictions for the upcoming season here today on Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It's your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami, NFL Draft Lead for the 33rd team. You can find all of our shows here on the Locked On Network on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Tip of the cap to our everydayers, because it is your team every day. We don't just say it. We live it here on the Locked On Network. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code in all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive your $50 bonus. Prize Picks, run your game. We are going to run our game here on the Monday episode now that we're into regular season schedule. Usually the Monday show is reacting to the game, and then the Tuesday show is all of the notations from the coach's film that you go through and really get into it. Then Wednesday, you start prepping the table for the next opponent, and then Thursday, we have crossover Thursday, and then Friday, you take whatever wind comes your way. It's probably some variation of recipe to win, things that must happen, preview the game. But we obviously didn't have a game this weekend. So we're in regular season form without the game before to get us off and roll. So I wanted to take the opportunity as we flip the calendar to September to look at final predictions that I have for the Dolphins this season, including a record prediction, a playoff prediction, MVP performer, breakout players, disappointments. We'll get into all of that here on today's show. But first, Mike McDaniel just got done talking to the media on Monday. Benito Jones is back at practice. Aaron Brewer is back at practice. Tyreek Hill is back at practice. Jalen Waddle is back at practice. So it's almost like they held these guys out to make sure that they didn't carry any ill-adverse effects from bumps and bruises over into the regular season. We're in regular season flow. Boom, these guys are out on the field. Great. And that's not to say somebody might not have a setback with something out on the practice field and that they're guaranteed to play, but the Dolphins did whatever they needed to do to get these guys as close to 100% for the start of the regular season. All your household names sound like we're in the clear. They're going to be ready for the game against Jacksonville. The other thing that happened, the Dolphins dropped their team captains. And I wanted to make sure I acknowledge this on today's show before we get into record prediction. Tua Tagovailoa, Jalen Ramsey, Tyreek Hill, David Long, Alec Ingold, Teron Armstead, Zach Sealer, Calais Campbell. It's a robust group of captains. That's a total of 8. I would assume Alec Ingold will qualify as your special teams captain, even though he is an offensive player. But a lot of good representation for the Dolphins. David Long, obviously a player who was a first-year player last year, emerging into a leadership role. Love seeing him in that spot. Zach Sealer having the opportunity without Christian Wilkins to kind of commandeer that room. You knew Calais Campbell when you added him. He was probably going to be in that mix. So there's your Dolphins team captains for 2024. Tua, Jalen, Ramsey. I should specify which of the 18 Jalen's. Tyreek Hill, David Long, Alec Ingold, Teron Armstead, Zach Sealer, Calais Campbell. I'll start. I won't bury the lead. What I'll tell you is this. My win prediction for the season has gone up. 1 game, to be exact. I have the Dolphins at 12-5. And how the games themselves shake out is, to be determined each and every week. But I think what helped me as I sat down and I looked at this, and teams have made more roster moves throughout the preseason, and you get a little bit of a better idea of where the Dolphins are as a team. I had some more questions about teams like the Rams, and that's a Monday night game. It's in Los Angeles. Dolphins going across the country after playing in Buffalo the previous week, but it is Monday night, so you get an extra night. They trade Ernest Jones. They've got a lot of youth on that defense. And that was one of those games for me. I looked at that, and then I looked at the Houston game. I looked at the Cleveland game. Those were 3 games where I wasn't quite sure how I felt about those teams. There's high expectations for all of those teams. And I'm enough down on Cleveland with their quarterback situation with Deshaun Watson, who they can't even get him through a consistent stretch of practices to start the season, and that's a Week 17 game. And I think about Miami, however long it was ago when Antonio Brown almost ruined the game for us, but like we went up, played in the snow, and beat the Steelers in Pittsburgh. So for all of the talking points that exist, and I understand why they exist, between those games against the Rams, the Texans, and the Browns, I have enough other questions about those teams that I said, you know what, my win prediction is going to come up again. I think Miami will perform very well at home. I have them at 6-2 at home, 6-3 on the road. And I'm not picking them to beat the Bills. They're going to have to prove that they can beat the Bills, and maybe I'm a little superstitious in that point, but maybe that's one of those ones where, hey, maybe the Rams game doesn't break your way, but you beat Buffalo at home in week 2. They're perfectly capable of beating Buffalo in week 2. You could draw up just about every desirable outcome home on a short week on Thursday night to start the season, with the Bills having a lot of players changing on the defensive back 7. Matt Milano's out for the year. Their safety room is completely new. They have brand new wide receivers involved in the passing game with Joe Brady, his first offseason impressing an offensive group. So you could look at a lot of different things and say, hey, this draws pretty well for Miami. It does. But you have to win the game. And until they do it, I'm not going to pick them to do it. Just because it's been that steep of a contrast between the two teams and the successes, unfortunately. I'd like to think this is the year that it's done, but for formal prediction purposes, I'm going to pass until they show it. I think the other hot take that I have is everybody looks at the end of season slate, weeks 14. I guess you could technically include 13, but if you're going to go by quarters of the season, weeks 14 through 18, Dolphins have 5 games: home against Jets, at Houston, home against San Francisco, at Cleveland, at New York Jets. I think my biggest hot take that has developed since the first couple of times we've gone through this schedule and looked at it, I think the Dolphins win 3 of those games, and I'm not sure the Week 18 game is going to matter. I think Kansas City has a really good pathway to a 1 seed. Maybe you're looking at seeding between the 2 seed and the 3 seed. Are you really gonna be in a position where you're playing guys to determine whether or not you're playing at home in the event of an upset in the divisional round for somebody else? I don't know. I see some questions with other teams in this division. I'd like to think Buffalo can do it. And look, we did the crossover show. And I said, to be the man, you got to beat the man. Buffalo's sitting pretty. And as I've sat here and I've gone through and I've picked all the games, I see enough other games. The difference between Miami and Buffalo, Miami playing a second place schedule and Buffalo playing a first place schedule, means the Dolphins play the Raiders, the Bills play the Chiefs, right? The Bills also have to go and suit up against the Detroit Lions in Detroit. Miami has to go to Green Bay. I mean, that's a hard draw for sure. The Dolphins get the Browns. The Bills get the Ravens. Buffalo's in Baltimore. So I think that schedule swing ends up turning around. I do think the Dolphins are a part of 3 AFC East teams that make the playoffs. But I'll tell you now, I'm picking the Dolphins to win 12 games as my final schedule prediction for the season. We'll get into team MVP, breakouts, disappointments, playoff outlook, all of that coming your way next here on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. Make sure that you stick with us. NFL season is right around the corner. If you want to get down to Hard Rock Stadium for a Dolphins game, you got to get your tickets through Gametime. Gametime takes all the guesswork out of buying tickets. You can get sight lines from your seat. You can get all-in pricing up front, so there's no surprises when you put the tickets into your cart. And with just a few taps on your phone, you can get tickets delivered directly to your phone. So if you spontaneously want to head down to the Rock and watch the Dolphins play the Jaguars on Sunday, you take the guesswork out of buying tickets at Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms to apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? It's game time. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is sponsored by BetterHelp. Between work projects, all the stuff with the kids, life has a tendency to really put you on your heels. And it's very difficult for you to make the time for the things that are most important to you, whether that's going to the gym, therapy, perhaps. And when life gets hard and time gets crunched, therapy is more important than ever. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try because making time for you is essential. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire and get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Make time for yourself with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOn today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOn. Team MVP. I think this is the year that Tua ends up becoming the team's MVP. And there's been a debate about Tyreek versus Tua and Tyreek's impact in the passing game versus Tua Tagovailoa. I get it, right? I get Tyreek Hill, an elite player, but it really feels like there's been a recalibration within Miami with the other players that they brought in the sporting cast, be that Odell Beckham or Jonnu Smith, and the conversations about the 2K chase. And Tua kind of said the quiet part out loud and said, hey, we've been trying to get Tyreek 2K the last couple years. I think they get away from that a little bit. And because of that, I think the value of Tua kind of transcends a little bit this season as kind of being the catalyst of the offense coming into year 3 in the system. I believe Le Batard asked him this. It's the first time he's been in the same system for 3 years, going all the way back to high school. And you can certainly tell the ways in which he has put an emphasis in balancing out his game. You know, there's been corrections, there's been overcorrections, all the weight in addition to the jiu-jitsu to put the body armor on. As long as he continues to be judicious with the football, I think you saw a little bit of glimpses of that in the preseason game with how he avoided that hit on the rollout to his right, then I think Tua's going to be in a spot where he strikes the balance this year. Being mobile, creating, but being responsible and not taking hits. And if that coincides with a reduction in high volume for Tyreek Hill, and maybe I'm wrong, right? Maybe Tyreek finishes with 1,850 yards this year, or 2,000 yards, or 2,100, or 1,700 for the third straight season, whatever it may be. And if that's the case, then we can sit here and we can spit in the wind and have the debate about who the MVP is. But I think it's just reading the tea leaves and the trend of the team and the trend of the tone of everybody involved. I think you'll get a little bit away from being so Tyreek Hill centric. I think that'll be a good thing for Jalen Waddle. I think that'll be a good thing for Tua. I think that'll be a good thing for the ancillary pieces as well, because you have guys that can win in different ways in different spots. So I think Tua ends up making the leap and would be considered, if not a consensus, a very strong candidate for this season, not just for Dolphins fans, but the general population, right? I know that was one of the things I caught some flack when we did the crossover show on Thursday. And we were talking about MVP candidates, and I mentioned if the Jets won 12 games, Aaron Rodgers would be the MVP. And the reason why I said that is because of the perception from the MVP voters. You know, and I don't know if Tua is ever going to win an MVP or not, like the actual league MVP, because it feels like you saw it with Brock Purdy, and Tua deals with a lot of the same stuff. A cog within the machine. Brock Purdy led his team to the number 1 seed, had 12 wins as a starter, accounted for 30-something total touchdowns with 40-something, 4,000 plus passing yards. And he wasn't even the highest voted MVP candidate on his own team. They gave that to Christian McCaffrey. I feel like some of that bias exists, whether conscious or subconscious, for MVP voters because of the discourse around Tua. So when you ask me an AFC MVP AFC East playoff candidate and say, hey, if the Jets do win 12 games, I don't think they do. But if they did, the MVP voters would bend over backwards to give this guy the award again. It has nothing to do with the deserving nature of the player. It has to do with the psyche of the voters that are actually responsible for giving out the award. And I don't believe that they would get over their conscious or subconscious biases that dictate the decision that they make with that award. But I think this year will push that perception in the right direction. It is kind of where I'm hoping and expecting. Overperformers, breakouts. I think Aaron Brewer, and Mike McDaniel said Brewer's going to practice today. And if he's ready for the start of the season and he plays against Jacksonville, great. I think he's an excellent schematic fit for what the Dolphins want to do. As we know, this is not a team that runs downhill at you and says double birds or coming, it's 3rd and 2, stop us. You can't. We're going to uproot you off the point of attack and blast you off the football and run right downhill at you. It's not really what they do, right? They're looking to create stress in as many different ways as possible. And I think Brewer, with his athleticism, I've seen enough of him anchoring early in camp against guys who made the roster for the Dolphins as defensive interior players that I think are viable players to control the point of attack. And you see the athleticism on tape, and when he gets outside and he gets on the second level and all the things that he's capable of, I think that's a player that is, we will not miss Connor Williams by the end of the year, is my perception and prediction there. I think Jalen Wright, maybe not for the start of the season. Maybe it is for the start of the season. Tua kind of teased. He thinks he sees some big things coming. But I think Jalen Wright at some point this season is going to commandeer a very significant role within the Dolphins offense, whether that's Raheem Mostert gets banged up or otherwise. And I think just over the moon with what you saw on tape, the understanding of the zone system, in addition to what he can do for running physical and getting downhill on guys, as a little different dynamic than what they've had outside of Jeff Wilson, but obviously Jalen has much more explosiveness to his game. So I think Jalen Wright is another breakout player for you. I think Jordan Brooks, kind of same feel as what I have with Aaron Brewer. Jordan Brooks, I think, is tailor-made for what the Dolphins want to be defensively. The ability to pressure, the ability to cover ground, the ability to be walked up on the line of scrimmage and then get out and hit your landmarks and take away throwing windows, the length and the ability to stack blocks and make plays off of blocks. Maybe it takes the first month of the season to really get into the flow of a new scheme, but I have high expectations for how Jordan Brooks acclimates to this system. And I think the Dolphins are going to feel really comfortable with him being kind of a cornerstone piece for the next several seasons. Both he and Aaron Brewer signing 3-year contracts. I think they're outstanding scheme fits, and I think they live up to the commitment the Dolphins made to each one of them this season. Players that maybe don't give you the same juice that you hope for. We're not off to a great start with Odell, right? And I do think Odell, the vision on passing downs to be the third threat, I think he can bring some really good value. But when the name and the household brand expectation is Odell Beckham, it comes with a certain expectation of performance. And I don't think he's going to be that. I don't think he has to be that. But this is somebody that got a significant incentive-laden contract, and I don't know how many of those incentives he's going to hit. I probably am tempering my expectations for the incentive portions of Odell maximizing his production. As far as a defensive player, I don't want to say I'm worried about, but I think you did see some of the cracks in Chop Robinson's game against Tampa Bay. The run defense element for him was why I was a little bit lower on him in the pre-draft process. There's no doubt about the physical tools. And the Dolphins, I think they're going to have to walk a line with the implementation of him as a player to put him in positions to be successful. And if they get stressed with bodies and they get strained into playing him at a higher volume in non-ideal down and distances as he's developing as a player, I think you may have some more ups and downs than I think the training camp buzz for Chop might have suggested. I feel pretty good about him as a long-term player, and his ability to develop is really exciting. But in year one, if he has to play a lot of early downs and the teams commit to running the ball at him, what does that look like? Because it probably won't align with how hot that name was the first 2-3 weeks of training camp for Chop Robbins. I'm not saying he's going to flame out. I'm not saying he's, but expectations minus reality equals disappointment, right? Is the saying. And it felt like maybe Chop got so hot early with being a buzzy player. Now, if he plays 500 snaps and 400 of them are rushing the passer and moving around in a lot of long down and distance situations, yeah, I think he'll probably, and I expect him to have good sack and pressure numbers this year. But the complete profile of the player, it's just, hey, that edge group kind of has some questions that maybe lead to him playing spots where he'll be better in year 2 and year 3 than he is right now. I hope that makes sense, and I certainly hope nobody takes that out of context. We're going to get into playoff outlook. I've done predictions for all the teams across the league. We'll get into the Dolphins playoff draw and what I think happens from there next on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. Make sure you stick with us. If you're interested in getting in on the action this weekend with football back, Prize Picks, the #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active users, Prize Picks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike other apps on Prize Picks, it is just you against the numbers. All you have to do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you can watch your winnings roll in. Prize Picks gives you a ton of opportunity to mix and match your stat projections and keep you in the game. Prize Picks is the only real money daily fantasy platform with an insurance policy as well. So if that lineup has to be in play, if one of your guys gets injured, you're protected in those instances. There's nothing worse than you getting something lined up and a guy goes down on the first play of the game. Don't have to worry about it with Prize Picks. If your player leaves in the first half and does not return, Prize Picks, your picks are still live. So if you want to get in on the action, download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONNFL on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive your $50 bonus. It is guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. I had the Dolphins as the 3 seed in the AFC. Again, remember, I've adjusted and came up on my prediction to have the Dolphins. I originally had them 11-6. I have them 12-5. And I've been surprised to hear how many Dolphins fans who say, this is the least excited I've been for a Dolphins team in quite some time. Don't really have any expectations. Come on now. This is a good football team. And it's different. There's new names. But this is part of life in the NFL when you have a competitive window is you can't just keep the same nucleus and core of players. And the Dolphins, unfortunately, had to experience some of that this past year. They lost a couple players that I really liked. I love Christian Wilkins. I love Rob Hunt. I was a big fan of Connor Williams. This time last year, you told me Connor Williams was holding out. I'd say, yeah, let's get the contract lined up, get him locked in. Things don't always work out, but they found alternative players in Calais Campbell and Aaron Brewer, who I think are really good fits for what the Dolphins want to do otherwise. And we did a whole bunch of shows about the offensive line, and as much as I would like it to be talent-wise better than what it is, their philosophy offensively, they have found some core beliefs in, and there's some good production to be able to tie that to. And I think the silver lining out of all that is you're going to miss Rob Hunt, but Rob Hunt played 400 snaps last year, 450 snaps last year. We'll see when we get Isaiah Wynn back. Not going to count that chicken, but between him, Connor Williams, and Rob Hunt, I mean, those guys played 1,100 snaps out of 3,300 last year, 1,200 snaps. They missed 2/3 of it. So what are you really missing? At least versus last year. And that's the unfortunate luck the Dolphins have, because I think if you had more stability with that group, you probably do win 1 or 2 more games. I can think of 2 off the top of my head. They were in position to win, and they didn't. And could have sorely used that talent. But I think working through that last year forced them to have to problem solve. And the way that they did that, I think they found conviction in, I think we can do it this way instead. We did that show last week in specific lens of 3rd and 4th and shorts. As the 3 seed, I have the Dolphins drawing the New York Jets in the wild card round. So potential back-to-back scenario here. And as I kind of teased, I don't think the week 18 game matters. So if you're in those kind of shoes, I don't have the Jets as a win or in candidate based off of tiebreakers, but from seeding purposes, it does get a little muddy between them and Buffalo as the 6 and the 7. Cincinnati is the 5. So the wild card round, as I have it assembled, is Miami hosting the Jets, Baltimore hosting the Bills, and the Texans hosting the Bengals with the Chiefs on a bye. And you could put me down for the playoff drought ending this year. I think the Dolphins playing at home, if they play the Jets, I think they beat the Jets at home in the playoffs. I have Buffalo and Cincinnati winning respective games. Cincinnati over Houston, Buffalo over Baltimore, which would take you to the divisional round, and Miami would be hosting the number 5 seed Cincinnati Bengals at home in the divisional round, with Kansas City hosting Buffalo on the other side. I'm not going to take it any further than that, because at that point, you're just, whatting in the wind just for the sake of it. But put me down on record. 12 wins for Miami. Playoff wind drought ends is kind of where I sit with this football team as we get into the first week of the regular season. I think the leadership changes. I think year 3 offensive stability with the key players involved and what that gives you from a problem-solving perspective in games. I think the depth of the roster being a little bit better. I think some of the questions about the teams on the schedule later in the year. I think all that sets up, and Miami does what they could have done last year had they taken care of business. And hopefully we don't have to talk about that game anymore late in the year at home. That is going to do it for us here on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. I appreciate you guys checking the show. Make it a great rest of your day. Keep it locked in right here on Locked On Dolphins, because it is your team every day. You can find us on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. I'm out of here. Peace.